Major Jack Stanton stood at the edge of the colony's defensive perimeter, his sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. The vast plain stretched endlessly under a sky marred by the distant shimmer of the Galactic Empire's landing craft. He gripped his battered rifle, a relic compared to the sleek weapons his enemy carried. But it was all they had. To the Empire, this colony on the edge of known space was an insignificant outpost, a place to extract resources and establish dominance. To Stanton and his men, it was home. The Empire's arrogance grated on Stanton more than their oppression. It wasn't enough for them to claim the land. They mocked the colonists' traditions, their way of life, and most of all, their lack of advanced technology. Their disdain was clear in every broadcast General Tyrannes made. Earth's legacy, the alien commander sneered in his latest address, is a relic of the past. Its people cling to primitive tools, while the galaxy advances without them. In the colony's makeshift command center, Stanton gathered his core team. Dr. Aaron Clark leaned over a worn holomap, his face etched with a mix of determination and frustration. A historian by training, Clark had been the first to argue that understanding the past was key to humanity's future. Beside him, Corporal Mike Riggins tightened the straps of his armor, his youthful energy barely contained. Stanton admired the kid's enthusiasm, even if it sometimes bordered on reckless. "They're toying with us, Jack," Clark said, straightening and gesturing at the holomap. "Their tactics are calculated. They're not just here to conquer. They want to humiliate us. They'll find we're not so easily broken," Stanton replied, his voice like gravel. "But plasma rifles can't cut through their shields, and every skirmish leaves us with fewer men and less hope. What if we stop thinking like them?" Clark asked, a spark of inspiration lighting his eyes. "What if we fought the way our ancestors did? Before shields, before energy weapons, when ingenuity mattered more than firepower." Stanton raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Clark turned to Riggins, who grinned. "We've been talking about this, sir. You know that old museum piece in town? The Gatling gun." Stanton frowned. "You're joking." "No joke," Riggins said, practically bouncing on his heels. "It's a mechanical marvel. It doesn't rely on energy cells or circuits, just good old-fashioned kinetic rounds. If we can adapt it, maybe we can punch through their shields." Stanton rubbed his temples. "You're telling me you want to bring a 100-year-old relic into a fight against the most advanced army in the galaxy?" Clark's voice turned serious. "It's not as crazy as it sounds. Their shields are designed to counter energy-based attacks. A high-velocity kinetic weapon might exploit a weakness they've never had to consider. And it's not like we've got better options." Stanton sighed, staring at the map as if it held answers. "Fine, but if this fails, it's on your heads." Later that night, the three of them stood in the colony's museum, a dusty structure tucked between the saloon and the general store. The Gatling gun loomed in the center of the room, its brass barrels tarnished but still imposing. Riggins whistled low. "She's a beauty. Rusty, ancient, and useless," Stanton muttered. "Not for long," Clark said. "We'll need to strip it down, retrofit the mechanism, and find a way to produce enough ammunition. But it's doable." Over the next week, the militia worked in secret. The colony's workshop buzzed with activity as Riggins and Clark tore into the Gatling gun's inner workings. They replaced worn gears, machined new parts, and experimented with alloys strong enough to withstand the strain of modernized rounds. Stanton watched from the sidelines, his skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect for their determination. Meanwhile, the Empire escalated their attacks. General Tyrannes seemed to delight in the colonists' struggles, his broadcasts dripping with condescension. "Earth's descendants cling to their myths and rusted artifacts," he declared. "What hope do they have against progress?" The answer came sooner than anyone expected. A patrol of Empire troops ventured too close to the colony one evening, their sleek hovercraft slicing through the air. Stanton saw an opportunity to test Clark's theory. He ordered the Gatling gun mounted on a ridge overlooking the plains, its barrels gleaming under the setting sun. As the patrol advanced, Riggins manned the gun, his hands steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "Ready when you are, Major," he said. Stanton nodded. "Let's see what this thing can do." The first volley erupted with a sound that echoed across the plains, a metallic roar unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. The projectile struck the lead hovercraft, shattering its shields in a shower of sparks. Within seconds, the vehicle exploded, its wreckage scattering across the grass. The remaining troops scrambled to regroup, but Riggins didn't let up. The Gatling gun tore through their ranks, the relentless firepower forcing the survivors into a chaotic retreat. When the dust settled, Stanton stared at the smoldering battlefield, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Not bad for a relic," he said. Clark grinned, his face streaked with grease. "History has a way of surprising you." Word of the victory spread quickly through the colony, lifting spirits that had been crushed under the weight of the Empire's domination. Stanton knew they still faced overwhelming odds, but for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a glimmer of hope. As he stood with Clark and Riggins in the workshop that night, Stanton spoke the words they had all been waiting to hear. "Keep working on it. If this is what it takes to remind the galaxy what humanity is capable of, then so be it." Outside, the stars shimmered with an almost defiant brilliance, as if reflecting the newfound resolve of the men below. The fight was far from over, but the colony had taken its first step toward turning the tide. The workshop buzzed with urgency, the scent of hot metal and oil filling the air. Sparks flew as Corporal Mike Riggins crouched over a makeshift workbench, welding new components into place. Beside him, Dr. Aaron Clark muttered calculations, scribbling notes onto a smudged tablet. The Gatling gun, now a gleaming hybrid of old-world mechanics and modern improvisation, stood at the center of their efforts like a testament to defiance. Major Jack Stanton watched the scene unfold, arms crossed. He'd long learned to temper hope with realism, but even he couldn't deny the surge of pride seeing his men so committed. The victory against the Empire's patrol had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. "How's it looking?" Riggins didn't pause, his voice muffled by the visor shielding his face. "Good. Better than good. But we're pushing this old design to its limit. We're going to need more power if we want this baby to handle extended combat." Clark glanced up, adjusting his glasses. "And ammunition. The rounds we've been using aren't optimized for this. They work, but if we want consistency, we need something stronger. Denser alloys, higher velocity." Stanton nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "Sergeant Hayes should be back soon with the scavenging team. Let's hope they found what we need." Across town, Sergeant Daniel Hayes led his men into the storage depot, their arms laden with scrap metal, old parts, and whatever ammunition they could find. Hayes was a man of resourcefulness, his sharp mind honed by years of survival in hostile environments. He dropped his haul onto a sorting table with a grunt, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "It's not pretty, but it'll work." Lieutenant Peter Monroe joined him, inspecting the materials with a critical eye. Monroe was the planner, the strategist. Where Hayes saw opportunity, Monroe saw potential pitfalls. "We're still running low on copper and tungsten. Without those, we can't refine the rounds properly." Hayes shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then we make do." The major's orders were clear. Give them hell with whatever we've got. Back at the workshop, Riggins and Clark examined the latest haul. Stanton stood nearby, his expression grim. The Empire had escalated their raids, and the colonists were stretched thin. Every scrap of progress felt like a small rebellion against an overwhelmingly superior force. Clark picked up a jagged piece of metal, turning it over in his hands. "This might work for a new casing. Riggins, think you can machine it?" "Piece of cake," Riggins said, already firing up the lathe. Meanwhile, Monroe arrived with maps of the surrounding area, spreading them across a table. "Major, we need to think about deployment. The gun's great, but it's not mobile enough. If the Empire decides to strike hard and fast, we won't have time to reposition it. Stanton studied the maps, his jaw tightening. Then we make it mobile, mounted on one of the old trucks. If the Empire's going to keep playing God, we'll make them chase their own tails. Clark tapped a finger against his temple, his mind racing. That's risky. We'd be exposing the operator. Then we make it count, Stanton replied, his voice firm. This isn't about holding the line anymore. It's about striking back. That night, under the cover of darkness, the militia tested their modified weapon. The Gatling gun, now mounted on a reinforced truck, roared to life. Its barrel spun faster than ever, sending a stream of high-velocity rounds into the empty plains. The power was staggering, the sound like thunder tearing through the night. Stanton stood beside Monroe, watching the tracers light up the darkness. "What do you think?" he asked. Monroe folded his arms. "It'll work, but we'll need a hell of a plan to make it count." The plan came together over the next few days. Monroe outlined a strategy to lure the Empire into a trap, a false retreat that would draw their forces into the open. The Gatling gun would be the centerpiece, striking when the Empire least expected it. Stanton's men worked tirelessly to prepare, every able-bodied colonist contributing to the effort. Even the youngest recruits, like Private Sean Carter, found themselves hauling supplies or reinforcing barricades. As the day of the operation approached, tension gripped the colony. Stanton called a final meeting, gathering his core team in the command center. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice steady. "They think we're broken. Let's show them what broken looks like when it fights back." The words hung in the air, a rallying cry that ignited a spark in every man present. Stanton's gaze swept the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "We've fought with less. We've bled for more. Tomorrow, we remind them who we are." Clark nodded, his expression resolute. "They'll never see it coming." The militia moved into position under the cover of night, their breaths fogging in the crisp air. Stanton rode in the lead truck, the Gatling gun secured and ready. Clark sat beside Riggins, double-checking the weapon's modifications. "If this works," Clark said quietly, "it's going to change everything." "It'll work," Riggins replied, his tone confident. "It has to." As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the Empire's forces advanced, their hovercraft casting long shadows over the plains. The trap was set, and Stanton's men braced for what would come next. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered. But as Stanton watched the enemy draw closer, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the first shadows of the Empire's assault fleet darkened the plains. Their hovercrafts, sleek and menacing, advanced in precise formation, accompanied by rows of infantry in shimmering battle armor. General Tirani stood at the forefront, his imposing figure framed by the eerie glow of his command vessel's shield. His expression betrayed nothing but contempt as he surveyed the colony's modest defenses. Major Jack Stanton crouched behind a ridge overlooking the battlefield, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The modified Gatling gun, now affectionately nicknamed Old Glory, was mounted on a reinforced truck hidden beneath a camouflage net. Corporal Mike Riggins sat in the driver's seat, his fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. Beside him, Dr. Aaron Clark double-checked the ammunition feed, his hands steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "Hold your positions," Stanton said into his comm. His voice was calm, but his men could hear the weight of responsibility behind it. "Wait for my signal." Sergeant Daniel Hayes and Lieutenant Peter Monroe lay in wait on the eastern flank, overseeing a line of militia armed with whatever weapons they could scavenge. Private Sean Carter, barely old enough to shave, gripped his rifle with white-knuckled determination. Monroe placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stick to the plan, kid. We've got this." The Empire's forces moved closer, their hovercraft engines emitting a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Tirani's raised a gauntlet hand, and the fleet came to a halt. His amplified voice boomed across the plains, dripping with derision. People of Earth, this is your last chance. Surrender now, and I may yet show mercy. Stanton gritted his teeth. Mercy, my ass, he muttered. Into the calm, he said. Riggins, you ready? Riggins grinned, though sweat beaded his brow. Born ready, Major. Then let's give them a proper answer. The truck roared to life, tearing through the camouflage netting as Riggins gunned the engine. Old Glory's barrels began to spin, a sound that grew into a deafening crescendo. The first volley erupted, and the effect was instantaneous. High-velocity rounds shredded through the Empire's forward line, their shields flaring uselessly before collapsing under the onslaught. The lead hovercraft exploded in a spectacular fireball, sending debris raining down on the battlefield. Tyrannies' expression twisted into one of shock and rage. What is this? He bellowed. Advance! Crush them! The Empire's troops surged forward, their disciplined ranks momentarily disrupted by the sheer ferocity of the attack. But Stanton's militia was ready. From the eastern flank, Hayes and Monroe led a coordinated barrage, forcing the Empire to split their focus. Carter fired his rifle with newfound confidence, the fear in his eyes replaced by grim determination. Old Glory continued its relentless assault, cutting swathes through the enemy. Riggins maneuvered the truck with precision, keeping the gun's line of fire unbroken. Clark shouted adjustments over the din, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Keep it steady. They're regrouping on the left. I see it. Riggins yelled back, swinging the truck around just as another wave of infantry advanced. The Gatling gun spat fire, the sound echoing like a storm. The Empire's once unshakable formation began to falter, their troops scattering under the onslaught. Tyrannies, now visibly furious, ordered his remaining hovercrafts to flank the militia. Stanton anticipated the move. Hayes, Monroe, take out those flankers. Don't let them get close. The militia's makeshift anti-vehicle weapons, cobbled together from old mining equipment and salvaged parts, came into play. Explosions rippled through the Empire's side ranks as Monroe's men scored direct hits on the hovercrafts. Hayes led a daring charge, his squad planting charges beneath the nearest enemy vehicle and retreating just as it erupted in flames. Despite their losses, the Empire pressed on, their superior numbers threatening to overwhelm the militia. Stanton knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He keyed his calm Clark Riggins' final push. We need to take out Tyrannies' command unit. Riggins swerved the truck toward the center of the battlefield, Old Glory roaring as it targeted the towering shield around Tyrannies' vessel. The rounds hammered into the shield, each impact causing it to ripple and dim. Tyrannies sneered, raising his own weapon, a massive energy cannon that glowed with ominous power. Stanton's voice cut through the chaos. Carter, get the launcher ready. Carter sprinted to a concealed position, dragging a heavy rocket launcher into place. His hands shook as he loaded the weapon, but Monroe's steadying presence beside him gave him the courage to aim. You've got this, kid, Monroe said. Take the shot. As Old Glory's final volley shattered Tyrannies' shield, Carter fired. The rocket streaked through the air, striking the command vessel with a blinding explosion. The force sent Tyrannies sprawling, his cannon clattering to the ground. The alien general rose unsteadily, his arrogance replaced by disbelief. Stanton emerged from cover, his rifle trained on Tyrannies. Not so invincible now, are you? Tyrannies glared at him. But before he could respond, Hayes' squad closed in, forcing the Empire's remaining forces to retreat. The battlefield fell silent save for the crackle of flames and the distant rumble of fleeing hovercrafts. The colonists erupted in cheers, their cries of victory carrying across the plains. Stanton lowered his rifle, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Riggins and Clark climbed down from the truck, their faces streaked with soot but alight with triumph. Carter stood frozen, the empty launcher still in his hands, until Monroe clapped him on the back. Hell of a shot, kid. Stanton gathered his team as the militia regrouped. We did it, he said, his voice rough but resolute. We showed them what Earth can do. But this isn't over. The Empire will be back, and when they are, we'll be ready. The men nodded, their resolve unshaken. As the sun set over the battlefield, casting long shadows over the wreckage, one thing was clear. Humanity had taken its first real stand against the Galactic Empire. And this time, they weren't fighting alone. They were inspiring others to rise.